The water was swallowing her whole. Amara Obi's arms flailed desperately as the ocean pulled her under, salt burning her throat as she gasped for air that wouldn't come. Her lungs screamed. The yacht party she'd been attending moments ago now seemed like a distant dream, the music and laughter replaced by the roar of waves crashing over her head. "Someone help me!" she choked out, her voice barely audible over the storm that had rolled in without warning. She was going to die. 27 years old, and this was how it would end, alone in the dark waters off the coast of Busan. Then she felt it. Strong hands gripping her waist, yanking her upward with brutal efficiency. She broke through the surface, coughing violently, as someone dragged her toward a speedboat that had appeared out of nowhere. Her rescuer hauled her over the side like she weighed nothing, and she collapsed onto the deck, vomiting seawater. "Breathe!" a voice commanded in accented English, cold and detached. Amara looked up through strands of wet hair plastered to her face. The man standing over her was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed entirely in black despite the rain. His face was sharp, beautiful in a dangerous way, with eyes that held absolutely no warmth. A scar ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, a thin white line that somehow made him more terrifying. "Thank you," she managed between coughs. "You saved my life." He didn't respond. Instead, he barked orders in Korean to the two men operating the boat, and they sped away from the site of the capsized yacht. Amara realized with growing horror that no one else from the party was visible in the water. Where was everyone? "My friends," she said, struggling to sit up. "There were others on that yacht. We need to go back." "They're already dead," the man said flatly, turning those ice-cold eyes on her. "Consider yourself fortunate." The casualness with which he said it made her blood run colder than the water she'd just been pulled from. This wasn't a good Samaritan. This was someone who knew death intimately. "Who are you?" she whispered. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Kim Tae-hyun, and you've just become a complication I didn't need." That's when Amara noticed the blood on the deck, the way his men kept glancing at her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to concern. This wasn't a rescue boat. This was an escape vessel. The yacht party hadn't capsized in a storm. It had been attacked, and she'd just been saved by the man responsible. 3 months earlier, Amara had been living her best life in Lagos. She'd built her tech company, Zenith Innovations, from the ground up, starting with nothing but a laptop and a dream at 23. Now, at 27, she was one of the most successful young entrepreneurs in West Africa, specializing in cybersecurity solutions for financial institutions. Her success had caught the attention of international investors, which was why she'd flown to South Korea for a conference on emerging markets. The yacht party had been hosted by a potential investor, a charming man named Park Jin-yuk, who'd promised her access to Asian markets. She'd had no idea Park Jin-yuk was laundering money for half the criminal organizations in Southeast Asia, and she definitely hadn't known that Kim Tae-hyun, the most feared enforcer in the Korean underworld, had been hunting him for months. Now, as the speedboat cut through the dark waters toward an unknown destination, Amara's mind raced. She was a witness to whatever had happened on that yacht. In the movies, witnesses didn't tend to live very long. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, forcing her voice to remain steady. Tae-hyun didn't turn around. "Somewhere you can't cause problems. I won't say anything to anyone. I don't even know what I saw." "You saw enough." He finally looked at her again, and she saw something flicker in his expression. Calculation. "You're Amara Obi, the tech genius. I know who you are." Her heart sank. Of course he knew. Someone like him would have researched everyone at that party before attacking. "Then you know I'm worth more alive than dead," she said, surprised by her own boldness. "My company has contracts with 3 major banks in Africa. People will look for me. Let them look." His tone was dismissive, but she caught the slight tightening around his eyes. She'd struck a nerve. The boat docked at a private marina 40 minutes later. Taehyun's men escorted her off the vessel and into a black SUV with tinted windows. She considered screaming, running, fighting, but the guns holstered at their hips convinced her otherwise. She'd survived drowning. She'd find another way out of this. They drove for an hour, leaving the city behind and climbing into the mountains. The safe house was isolated, surrounded by dense forest, invisible from any main road. It was beautiful in a stark way, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a valley shrouded in mist. "Your room is upstairs," Taehyun said as they entered. "Don't try to leave." There are guards posted at every exit, and the nearest town is 15 kilometers away through terrain you won't survive. "So I'm a prisoner." "You're a protected liability. There's a difference." He moved to pour himself a drink from a crystal decanter, the first casual gesture she'd seen from him. Park Jin-hyuk had friends. Powerful friends who will want revenge. "They saw you on that yacht. If they find you before I neutralize the threat, you'll experience things that make drowning seem pleasant." Amara wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware that she was still wearing her soaked party dress, her hair dripping water onto the expensive hardwood floor. "This is absurd," she said, her voice shaking despite her attempt to sound confident. "You can't just keep me here indefinitely." "I have a business to run, people who depend on me, a life back home." Taehyun took a slow sip of his whiskey, studying her over the rim of his glass. "Your life back home is on pause. Adapt to that reality quickly, Miss Obi. It'll make the next few weeks considerably easier." "Weeks?" The word came out as almost a shout. "You expect me to hide here for weeks while you do whatever criminal activity you people do?" Something dangerous flashed across his face, and he set down his glass with deliberate precision. "You people," he repeated softly. Interesting choice of words for someone whose life I just preserved. Amara bit her lip, realizing she'd let her fear make her reckless. This man had killed others tonight without hesitation. Insulting him wasn't a survival strategy. "I apologize," she said, forcing the words out. "I'm frightened and confused." "But I meant what I said. I have responsibilities. My company has a product launch scheduled for next month. My team will panic if I simply vanish." "Then contact them. Tell them you've decided to extend your stay in Korea for personal reasons." He gestured toward the stairs. "There's a phone in your room. Make it convincing. If anyone suspects something's wrong, if authorities get involved, the people hunting Park's associates will find you faster than I can protect you." The casual way he framed it as protection rather than imprisonment was almost impressive. Amara wanted to scream, to demand he take her to an embassy, to insist on her rights. But the cold logic of her situation settled over her like a weight. He was right. She'd been seen with Park Jin-hyuk hours before his death. To certain people, that made her either a witness or an accomplice. "Fine," she said quietly. "I'll make the calls. But eventually, you have to let me go." "Eventually," he agreed, his tone suggesting that eventually was a flexible concept. "Now go change. You're ruining my floor." A woman named Minji appeared to show her upstairs, silent and efficient, with eyes that revealed nothing. The bedroom was surprisingly luxurious, decorated in neutral tones, with an attached bathroom that looked like it belonged in a five-star hotel. Someone had already laid out clothes on the bed, women's clothes in approximately her size. "How long has he been planning this?" Amara asked, holding up a sweater. Minji's expression remained unchanged. "Mr. Kim prepares for every contingency. Dinner is at 8. Don't be late." She left before Amara could ask anything else. Alone finally, Amara sank onto the bed and let herself shake. She'd come so close to death tonight, and now she was trapped in a mountain hideaway with a man who radiated danger, like other people radiated warmth. She thought of her mother back in Lagos, her younger brother starting university, her team at Zenith who believed in her vision. She couldn't fall apart. Not yet. After a scalding shower that helped her feel almost human again, she found the phone Taehyun had mentioned. It took 3 calls to convince her assistant, Chisholm, that everything was fine. that she'd simply met someone interesting and decided to take a short vacation before returning home. The lies tasted bitter, but Chisholm eventually accepted them, probably thinking Amara had finally taken her advice about work-life balance. If only she knew. Dinner was an awkward, silent affair. Taehyun sat across from her at a long table that could have seated 12, eating methodically while reviewing documents on a tablet. The food was excellent, traditional Korean dishes prepared by an unseen cook, but Amara barely tasted any of it. "You're not eating," he observed without looking up. "Strange how nearly dying ruins one's appetite. You'll need your strength." "Eat." It wasn't a suggestion. Amara forced herself to take several bites, and once she started, her body's need for sustenance took over. She hadn't realized how hungry she was. "Why did you kill Park Jin-hyuk?" she asked suddenly. Taehyun's eyes lifted from his tablet, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set the device aside and leaned back in his chair. "He stole from the wrong people. Redirected funds meant for operations in Manila to his personal accounts. Thought he could disappear before anyone noticed." His voice was conversational, as if discussing the weather. He was mistaken. And the others on the yacht? Were they all criminals too? "Does it matter?" "Yes," Amara said firmly. "It matters to me." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the cold facade. 3 of them were accountants who helped him hide the money. The rest were unfortunate enough to be present. Collateral damage. "You say that so easily." Like they were nothing. "In my world, Miss Obi, everyone is nothing until they prove otherwise. You survive by understanding that fundamental truth." He stood, signaling the end of both the meal and the conversation. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we begin figuring out how to keep you alive long enough to return to your ordinary life." But as the days passed, Amara discovered that nothing about this situation would be ordinary. Taehyun was gone most of each day, leaving her under Minji's watchful supervision. The safehouse had a library filled with Korean and English books, a gym, and surprisingly fast internet, though she was forbidden from accessing her company's secure servers or social media. She could work on general projects, review code, plan strategies for when she returned. If she returned. At night, Taehyun would appear for dinner, and they'd eat in that same heavy silence. But gradually, incrementally, cracks appeared in both their armor. On the 5th night, she asked him, "How does someone become what you are?" He'd looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his dark eyes. "By surviving what would destroy weaker people. By making choices that forfeit the luxury of a conscience." "I don't believe that," Amara said softly. "I think you tell yourself that to make the burden lighter." His jaw tightened. "You know nothing about my burdens." "Then help me understand." "Because the man who pulled me from that water, who could have left me to drown, doesn't seem like someone without a conscience." Taehyun stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Don't mistake a strategic decision for compassion, Miss Obi. You're alive because you're useful. Remember that." But his words lacked their usual conviction, and they both knew it. The turning point came 2 weeks into her captivity. Amara woke in the middle of the night to shouting downstairs, followed by gunshots that made her heart stop. She pressed herself against the bedroom wall, terror flooding her system, remembering the feeling of drowning, of helplessness. Her door burst open. Taehyun stood there, blood splattered across his white shirt, a gun in his hand. "We're leaving." "Now." "What's happening?" "They found us faster than I anticipated." "Get dressed. 30 seconds." His voice was clipped, urgent, the first time she'd seen him truly rattled. She threw on clothes with shaking hands, and he grabbed her arm, pulling her into the hallway. Below, she could hear Minji and the other guards exchanging fire with unseen attackers. The beautiful safehouse had become a war zone. Taehyun led her to a back staircase she hadn't known existed, down into a garage where another SUV waited. They climbed in, and he drove like a man possessed, tearing down the mountain road at speeds that should have been impossible in the darkness. Who were they? Amara gasped, gripping the door handle. Park's partners. The Zhao Syndicate from Shanghai. I should have moved you sooner. For the first time, she heard something like regret in his voice. They drove for hours, constantly changing direction, until they reached a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood of Seoul. It was cramped, nothing like the mountain house, but Taehyun assured her it was secure. This is one of my oldest safe locations. No electronic records, no paper trail. We'll stay here until I can arrange your extraction back to Nigeria. You're really going to let me go? She hadn't realized how much she'd doubted it until the words left her mouth. He looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Keeping you here puts you in more danger than releasing you. The Zhao Syndicate wants everyone connected to Park eliminated. Once you're back in Lagos, you're no longer their concern. And you? What happens to you? I handle the Zhao problem, permanently. His tone suggested exactly how he'd handle it. They spent 3 days in that cramped apartment, closer than they'd ever been in the mountain house. There was only one bedroom, and Taehyun insisted she take it while he slept on the couch. But the walls were thin, and she could hear him pacing at night, making quiet phone calls in Korean, planning his next moves. On the second evening, she found him sitting at the small kitchen table, staring at nothing. A bottle of soju sat open beside him. "May I join you?" she asked. He gestured to the empty chair, and she sat, accepting the glass he poured for her. They drank in silence for several minutes before she spoke. "My father died when I was 19, she said quietly. "Heart attack, completely unexpected. I was in my second year at university, studying computer science, and suddenly I was responsible for my mother and my brother. We had nothing. Insurance barely covered the funeral." Taehyun listened without interrupting, his eyes fixed on her face. "Everyone told me to quit school, get a regular job, be practical. But I kept thinking, if I just worked harder, pushed further, I could build something that would protect my family forever. So I did. I built Zenith from midnight coding sessions, and borrowed money and sheer stubborn refusal to fail." She met his gaze. "I'm telling you this because I understand what it means to survive. To make impossible choices. Maybe not your choices, but I understand the weight." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I was 14 when my father sold me to settle a gambling debt. The man who bought me ran protection rackets in Busan. He had particular uses for young boys." His voice was flat, emotionless, but his hands gripped the glass hard enough that she feared it might shatter. "I survived 3 years before I was strong enough to kill him. By then, I'd learned everything he had to teach. Violence, strategy, how to turn fear into power." Amara's hand moved almost without her permission, covering his on the table. He stiffened but didn't pull away. "I'm sorry that happened to you." "Don't be!" "It made me who I am. Powerful, feared, untouchable." But the words sounded hollow, like a lesson memorized rather than believed. "It made you alone," she said gently. His eyes snapped to hers, and she saw something break open behind them, something raw and human that he'd kept buried beneath layers of ice and violence. For just a moment, Kim Taehyun wasn't a ruthless enforcer. He was simply a man who'd survived horrors and paid the price in pieces of his soul. Then the moment passed. He pulled his hand away, and the walls went back up. "You leave tomorrow night. I've arranged everything." The next evening, Taehyun drove her to a private airfield where a small plane waited. A forged passport, a new identity, a direct flight to Lagos via Dubai. He'd thought of everything. "What will you do?" she asked as they stood beside the plane. "What I always do." "Survive." He handed her a card with a single phone number written on it. "If the Zhao Syndicate finds you, call this number. Don't hesitate." "Will I ever see you again?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to explore. Taehyun's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "In another life, perhaps. One where I'm not who I am, And you didn't witness what you witnessed. His hand came up, almost touching her face, then dropped. Go home, Amara Obi. Build your empire. Live the life I never could. She wanted to say something, anything that would bridge the impossible distance between their worlds. But words failed her. Instead, she did something reckless. She stood on her toes and kissed his cheek, feeling him freeze beneath the gesture. Thank you for saving me. All the times you saved me. Then she turned and walked toward the plane before her courage failed. She didn't look back, but she felt his eyes on her until she disappeared inside. 6 months later, Amara sat in her Lagos office, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and gold. Zenith Innovations had just closed its biggest deal yet, expanding into 3 new countries. She'd told everyone she'd taken an impromptu vacation after the conference, needed to clear her head. Only Chisholm suspected there was more to the story, but she didn't push. The card with Taehyun's number sat in her desk drawer. She'd never called it, and he'd never called her. But sometimes, late at night when she couldn't sleep, she'd take it out and wonder. Wonder if he'd survived his war with the Zhao Syndicate. Wonder if he ever thought about those weeks in the mountains, the moments when they'd almost been something other than captor and captive. Wonder if, in another life, things might have been different. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. She glanced at it absently, then froze. A photograph accompanied the headline about a major gang war resolution in Seoul. And there, in the background, barely visible but unmistakable, was a tall figure in black with a scar running down his face. He'd survived. Of course he had. Amara smiled despite herself and tucked the card back in its drawer. Some stories didn't get happy endings. Some people lived in different worlds, separated by choices and circumstances that couldn't be undone. But for a brief moment, their paths had crossed, and both had walked away, changed. That would have to be enough. She turned back to her computer, back to building her empire, back to the life she'd fought so hard to create. But the card stayed in her drawer, a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected people save us in ways we never could have imagined. And somewhere in Seoul, Kim Tae-hyun looked up at the same sky and remembered a woman who'd seen the human beneath the monster, even if just for a moment. Some stories end not with resolution, but with possibility. And that, perhaps, was its own kind of hope. If you enjoyed this story of survival, unexpected connections, and the thin line between salvation and captivity, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell for more compelling tales that explore the complex spaces where different worlds collide. Drop a comment below telling us what you think Amara and Taehyun's future holds. See you in the next story.